What if everything you've been taught about Hades is deliberately designed to make you fear him? The god of the underworld isn't the demon popular culture wants you to believe. In fact, buried beneath centuries of Christian reinterpretation and Hollywood dramatization lies a far more complex, nuanced, and surprisingly just ruler of the dead. What we're about to uncover will completely reframe your understanding of ancient mythology. The real story of Hades is far more fascinating and far more reasonable than any story they've ever told you about the underworld and the afterlife. For thousands of years, Western civilization has painted Hades as evil incarnate. Movies, paintings, and literature depict him as a dark tyrant who torments souls and schemes relentlessly against humanity. But here's what most people fail to understand. Hades was never the villain of Greek mythology. He was simply assigned an impossible job, one that no reasonable being could perform without earning universal disdain and fear from the living world above. The mainstream narrative tells us that Hades is darkness, punishment, and eternal suffering. We're told that the underworld is a prison of agony, a place of torment where evil souls burn forever in endless anguish and despair. But this version of the underworld, this Christian-influenced image of hellfire and damnation, was never part of Greek thought. It was grafted onto ancient mythology centuries later by religious institutions seeking to consolidate power and control through fear and intimidation. The real Hades mythology tells a radically different story. When we examine the primary sources, Homer, Hesiod, Ovid, and Virgil, we discover something shocking. Hades was respected. He was judicious. He was, by the standards of the time, remarkably merciful and fair. The Greeks didn't worship Hades with fear. They respected him with reverence and clear-eyed understanding of his essential role in maintaining cosmic balance and order. So why has Hades been so thoroughly vilified? Why do we still see him portrayed as evil across modern media and entertainment? The answer reveals something profound about how history gets rewritten, how narratives shift when cultural power changes hands, and how one god became the convenient scapegoat for every fear humanity ever invented about death itself. Understanding Hades requires us to confront the uncomfortable truth. We've been systematically deceived about who he actually was and what he represented in ancient Greek culture. To understand Hades, we must go back to the very beginning, to the birth of the gods themselves. Hades was born the son of Kronos and Rhea, the third among the Titans' children. He came into the world alongside Zeus and Poseidon, his two brothers who would come to rule the sky and the sea, respectively, in the world of gods and mortals. What's crucial to understand is that Hades didn't choose the underworld. After the Titanomachy, the epic war between the Titans and the Olympians that determined the fate of the entire cosmos, the three brothers drew lots to divide dominion over creation itself. Zeus received the sky and earth, making him supreme ruler of the visible world above. Poseidon received the seas, commanding all ocean realms and maritime domains. Hades received what remained, the realm of the dead, the earth's depths, and the hidden treasures beneath the world's surface. This division was neither punishment nor consequence for Hades. It was pragmatic necessity. Someone had to govern the dead. Someone had to maintain order in the afterlife. Someone had to ensure that souls proceeded correctly to their respective destinations, rewards for the good, neutral spaces for the ordinary, and appropriate punishment for the wicked. Hades accepted this responsibility without complaint, without resentment, without demanding special compensation or protest. He simply did what needed to be done for the cosmos and its eternal operation. The kingdom Hades inherited was vast and extraordinarily complex. The underworld wasn't a single monotonous hellscape, as later Christian interpretations claimed. It was a realm of distinct regions, each serving a specific purpose within a carefully structured cosmic system.
The asphodel meadows awaited ordinary souls who had lived neither exceptionally good nor exceptionally bad lives. The Elysian fields received heroes and the exceptionally virtuous, a place of peace and eternal comfort. Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit of the underworld, was reserved for the most heinous offenders, those who murdered guests, broke sacred oaths, or committed the most severe crimes against the gods and humanity. This infrastructure reveals something absolutely essential about Hades. He was a bureaucrat of justice. He didn't invent these divisions out of personal malice or cruelty. They reflected Greek philosophical understanding of moral consequence and ethical accountability. Hades wasn't about punishment for punishment's sake. He was about maintaining cosmic order and ensuring that consequences matched transgressions fairly and consistently across all eternity. The Greeks understood this perfectly well. In Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, when Hades is mentioned, he's never depicted as evil or tyrannical. In fact, he's one of the few gods who rarely involves himself in human affairs, unlike Zeus, who constantly descends to seduce mortal women, creating chaos and suffering throughout history. Unlike Poseidon, who drowns cities in rage and retribution. Unlike Ares, who delights in bloodshed and warfare. Hades stays in his realm, doing his job methodically, maintaining the boundary between life and death with absolute consistency and impartiality. But there's another crucial detail most people overlook entirely. Hades possessed something other gods did not: absolute honesty and reliability. When someone made a deal with Hades, the deal held permanently. When someone was promised entry to the Elysian fields for their virtue, they received it without question or delay. Hades didn't trick, didn't deceive, didn't exploit legal loopholes like Zeus constantly did. He was the most reliable, the most just, the most predictable of all the Olympians. This is where the narrative becomes even more interesting and profound. Hades ruled not through force or intimidation, but through the inherent respect that comes from competence and fairness. Souls didn't flee Hades, they accepted their fate because Hades administered it with impartial justice. The dead understood that Hades was neither cruel nor merciful in the arbitrary way other gods were. He was consistent, reliable, and fundamentally just in all his dealings and judgments. Consider the profound symbolism Hades carried. His helm of invisibility made him the god of hidden things, secrets, wealth, and the mysteries of the earth itself. His bident was a three-pronged staff, not a weapon of war like Zeus's thunderbolt or Poseidon's trident. It was a symbol of sovereignty over the fertile earth itself. This is why Hades was also associated with wealth and abundance. The precious metals, the gems, the minerals that lay beneath the earth, all were Hades' domain. He was the god of prosperity as well as death. The Romans understood this far better than the Greeks sometimes did. They called him Pluto, from the Latin meaning to bring abundance. Pluto brought wealth from the earth. He was consulted by merchants and farmers seeking prosperity and good harvests. He wasn't purely a god of death. He was a god of transformation, of the hidden becoming revealed, of seeds planted in darkness emerging as growth and abundance in the natural world.
Buried deep within the mythology lies a story that completely contradicts the popular image of Hades as a tyrant: the abduction of Persephone. Yes, abduction. And yet, this story reveals something profound about Hades that makes him the most sympathetic figure in Greek mythology and literature. The mainstream version makes Hades the villain. He sees Persephone, wants her, takes her by force, imprisons her in darkness. Case closed. Hades is a rapist, a kidnapper, a monster. This interpretation has dominated Western consciousness for centuries. Hollywood films, popular retellings, and modern adaptations have cemented this narrative into our collective consciousness, making it nearly impossible to see the original story clearly and objectively. But the original ancient sources tell a radically different story. In Hesiod's Theogony and the Homeric hymn to Demeter, we find crucial details that everyone conveniently ignores. Yes, Hades took Persephone without her consent, but here's the critical part that changes everything. Zeus authorized it. Zeus, the king of gods, arranged this union himself as a solution to a deeper problem affecting the cosmic order. Why would Zeus do this? Because Hades was powerful and lordly, but he was also profoundly alone. Every other major god had lovers, children, a court of admirers, and constant involvement in human affairs and earthly matters. Hades spent eternity in the underworld, ruling a kingdom of the dead, completely separated from the society of Mount Olympus and the living world. Zeus decided, and this is crucial, that it was fundamentally unjust that Hades should have no companion, no queen to rule beside him. Was this consensual by modern standards? Absolutely not. But within its ancient context, the mythology doesn't present this as a villainous act by Hades. It presents it as inevitable, even tragic. Hades wasn't portrayed as cruel, he was portrayed as lonely and ultimately deserving of companionship and partnership despite his isolated role. But here's where it gets even more interesting and revealing about Hades' true character. After Persephone was taken, after Demeter learned the truth, after she wrought devastating destruction upon the earth in her grief, what happened? A deal was brokered by the gods. Persephone would spend part of the year with Hades in the underworld and part of the year with her mother above. This compromise created the seasons. Winter brought darkness because Demeter mourned her daughter's absence. Spring brought renewal because Persephone returned to the surface. This compromise reveals something absolutely astonishing about Hades. Hades agreed to a settlement that required personal sacrifice. He didn't keep Persephone against her will permanently. He didn't force eternal separation. He accepted a shared arrangement, which suggests that his feelings for her were genuine, not merely possessive or tyrannical. He was willing to sacrifice his own desires for the greater good, willing to share his queen for half the year to prevent the destruction of the entire world and all its people. In many later versions of the myth, particularly in Ovid and Roman retellings, Persephone comes to love Hades deeply. She becomes not a prisoner, but a queen. She rules beside him with authority and respect. She's not victim, but sovereign, commanding the underworld and its inhabitants with wisdom. This transformation completely contradicts the idea that Hades was a tyrant or cruel ruler. When we examine all the evidence comprehensively, a completely different picture of Hades emerges from the scholarly study of ancient texts. He wasn't a tyrant. He was a god who accepted an unwanted responsibility with dignity and grace. He maintained cosmic order without resorting to the capriciousness that characterized other Olympians. He was honest when others deceived. He was just when others were arbitrary. He was consistent when others were chaotic and selfish. Here's what makes this even more profound and compelling. Hades was the only Olympian who didn't cause suffering on Earth. He never struck mortals with thunderbolts. He never created storms or earthquakes. He never seduced human women or interfered in human affairs unnecessarily. He did his job, maintained the boundaries between life and death, organized the afterlife fairly, preserved cosmic order, and nothing more, asking for nothing in return. The Greeks understood this perfectly and deeply. They respected Hades, even if they didn't speak of him openly. They didn't worship him with the same enthusiasm as Zeus or Athena, but they recognized his essential role and authority.
They called him the euphemistic names, the giver of wealth, the rich one, the unseen, because even speaking his name directly brought existential anxiety and fear. But this anxiety wasn't born from fear of his cruelty. It was born from the natural human anxiety around death itself and human mortality. And then came Christianity during the medieval period. The church needed a visual representation of hell, a ruler to preside over damnation and eternal punishment. They took Hades, a god they fundamentally misunderstood through cultural differences, and merged him with Satan and the devil. They took a ruler of the dead and transformed him into a demon. They took myths about the natural cycle of seasons and just organization of the afterlife and reinterpreted them through a lens of eternal punishment and divine retribution. Hades didn't cause this transformation or these misunderstandings. He was simply the easiest target available. He already ruled a dark underground kingdom. He already oversaw a realm that contained punishment for the most wicked. The church's creative reimagining transformed Hades' neutral domain of necessary consequence into an instrument of cosmic cruelty and fear used for controlling populations. This is the final truth about Hades. He was vilified not because of his actual character and actions, but because his domain, death itself, was already feared by humanity. And that primal fear became so overwhelming that we needed someone to blame. We needed a demon, a dark lord, a figure of pure evil to explain and contain our deepest terror about mortality and the unknown future beyond death. But the actual Hades mythology offers something profoundly different and far more mature. It offers a vision of death that's not cruel, but just. A vision of the afterlife that's complex but fair. A vision of a God who does his duty without complaint, without cruelty, without interference in human free will. It offers a more mature and philosophical perspective on mortality than the punitive framework Christianity imposed upon Western consciousness for centuries. When we truly understand Hades, when we look past corrupted narratives and return to ancient sources, we discover a God who deserves respect, not fear. A God whose story tells us something profound about justice, duty, and the acceptance of necessary responsibility. A God whose greatest crime was simply not being Zeus, not being charismatic, not being the kind of deity that captured popular imagination through constant intervention and drama. Hades was, in many ways, the true hero of Olympus. He was the god who never asked to rule the dead, but did so with integrity and fairness. The god who made deals and kept them. The god who showed compassion within the bounds of justice. The god who, when challenged by Demeter, was willing to compromise for the greater good. His story is one of sacrifice, duty, and quiet greatness that history has largely forgotten. But his story remains buried, hidden, and obscured beneath layers of reinterpretation and fear throughout human history and cultural transmission. The question we must ask ourselves is, how many other stories have we gotten wrong? How many other figures in history and mythology have we misunderstood because we inherited corrupted narratives passed down through generations? What other truths are we still refusing to see because they challenge our preconceived notions about good and evil? The story of Hades isn't just mythology or entertainment. It's a lesson in how power shapes narrative, how fear distorts understanding, and how the easiest target often bears the least responsibility for the crimes attributed to it. Perhaps it's finally time we reconsidered everything we've been taught about the forgotten ruler of the underworld.